Our lesson today is John's report of the resurrection. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the tomb. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to them, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." Then Peter and the other disciple set out and went toward the tomb. The two were running together, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent down to look in and saw the linen wrappings lying there, but he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came, following him, and went into the tomb. He saw the linen wrappings lying there, and the cloth that had been on Jesus' head, not lying with the linen wrappings, but rolled up in a place by itself. Then the other disciple, who reached the tomb first, also went in, and he saw and believed. For as yet they did not understand the scripture that Jesus must rise from the dead. Then the disciples returned to their homes. But Mary stood weeping outside the tomb. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb, and she saw two angels in white sitting where the body of Jesus had been lying, one at the head and the other at the feet. They said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said to them, "They have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." When she had said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there. But she did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you looking for?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Hebrew, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said to her, "Do not hold on to me, because I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them that he had said these things to her. Contained in this scripture reading is what I believe is the first, the best, and the shortest Easter sermon ever preached. I have seen the Lord. Today, mine will be a little longer. One of the things I like most about my job is the conversations I get to have with people. And I'm not talking just passing the time of day. I'm not talking just about idle conversations. Nothing wrong with those. But I'm talking about those deep conversations about important things, about life and faith and woundedness and healing and all those kinds of things. And in all my 30-something years of ministry, the best conversation I've ever had with any member of my congregation was with a fourth grader. Some of the kids at her school were telling her that God was a myth, that there was no God, and that she was silly for believing in the stories the Bible tells. So she came to me wanting to know how we can know God is real. Well, we opened the Bible. We read some stories about Jesus. We talked about faith. I explained to her how the Bible tells us God is love, and just like love, which you can't see but you know is there, God is there too with her. And we talked about how each of us ultimately believes for ourselves what we want to believe about God. And if somebody has a theory, a belief, a conviction that's different than the ones we hold, okay, that's fine, but they don't get a vote in how we feel about God. And she listened carefully, and she seemed happy and satisfied with that conversation. I, on the other hand, was anything but satisfied with that conversation. And I've been thinking about the talk I had with that little fourth grader pretty much ever since, because I'm not really satisfied that there is sufficient hard evidence to prove the resurrection. Have you ever thought about that? I mean, if somebody said from a reputable university or a seminary that somebody had discovered rock solid evidence for the existence of God and for the resurrection and the truth of every single word in the Bible, wouldn't you want to hear that? Wouldn't you want to have a look? I would. Well, the reality of it is, even the first witnesses of the resurrection weren't all that satisfied with the evidence. All four Gospels tell a story about the resurrection. They each, in their own way, report the events of that first Easter morning. And every one of them have similar themes, weeping and fear and misunderstanding and the loss of hope. John's version we read just this morning says even that as the two disciples are peering into the tomb, they still have no idea what it is they're witnessing. They haven't yet understood, despite Jesus' talking to them about it for 3 years, what he must do on the cross and then on the third day. Moments later, Mary has a conversation with Jesus. And for most of it, she doesn't know who she's talking to. And then, of course, we all know about the disciple Thomas. Later Easter Day, Jesus appears to all the disciples except Thomas. And when he does finally show up, Thomas, the other disciples excitedly tell him, hey, we've seen Jesus. And Thomas isn't believing a word of it because he demands better evidence. He says, unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands and put my finger in his side, I will not believe. Wow. What is going on with these people? What's going on is none of them expects Jesus to show up. None of Jesus' closest followers expect Easter to happen. Not one. The disciples don't. The women don't. Jesus' family doesn't. And especially the Romans don't. The Romans don't because they specialize in stopping Jewish religious movements, just like Jesus's. They find the leader, they execute him publicly, the end. But not this time. This time, something different happens. Something unexpected. Something really, really big. Let me ask you a question. How many of you have ever traveled to see Meteor Crater in Arizona? Raise your hand. Okay. A good number of you. How many of you saw it as a kid? How many of you wondered why your parents were driving you across a barren desert for years and years and years? It seemed. Yeah. To see a big hole in the middle of, nothing. Weird. When my kids were younger, despite my feelings about Meteor Crater, we said, hey, let's take the kids to see Meteor Crater. And they didn't fuss too much. They were a little older, but they did manage a masterful job of containing their enthusiasm as we drove to Meteor Crater, then rising up from the flat desert floor. As we got closer and closer and closer, you begin to see what looks like hills. My son leans forward and he says, hey, Dad, where did those hills come from? And I told him, those aren't hills. That's the rim of the crater. And all of a sudden, the interest level in the car kind of went up. And once we got on top of the rim of the actual crater itself and we were able to look down into that hole, my son walks up to me and says, hey, Dad, something really big must have happened here. He was right. He was right. The crater is a mile across in diameter, almost 600 feet deep. Scientists think that the meteor that struck the Earth that made that enormous hole was relatively small as meteors go, only about as big as a house. So yeah, something big happened there. A relatively small thing made a big impact in more ways than one. That is about the best description of Easter I can come up with. A small thing made a huge impact. Now I say it's possibly the best description of Easter because it is indisputable, part of it, and part of it is up to you to decide. The fact is, the only hard evidence we have of Jesus being raised from the dead is an empty tomb. That's it. One empty tomb, a long time ago in a far-flung region of the Roman Empire, that's the relatively small thing. Like I said, what impact that has is really up to you. When you think about the empty tomb on this glorious Easter morning, what do you see? Well, that depends on your perspective, doesn't it? Like Meteor Crater, you can either see a whole lot of nothing, or you can see evidence of something earth-shattering. One of the big reasons we're all here this morning, maybe the big reason we're all here this morning, is because the first witnesses of the empty tomb ultimately decide that what they're looking at is earth-shattering. And what they do after that decision is the best historical evidence, not hard evidence, but historical evidence for Easter. Because Easter shouldn't have happened the way it did. What should have happened with all of Jesus' disciples after his crucifixion is they disappear. They leave the stage of history. We hear not a single word from them ever again. They should have kept quiet. They should have spent the rest of their lives thanking their lucky stars the Romans didn't kill them too, a mop-up operation, because that's how the Romans ended religious movements. And history tells us they were absolutely successful every single time, except this one. Jesus' followers, as we know, don't disappear from the stage of history. Jesus' followers won't keep quiet about what they saw or didn't see in that empty tomb. Jesus' followers don't disperse and devote the rest of their lives to staying out of the Romans' way. They do just the opposite. His followers multiply and get louder and spread all over the world, finally conquering Rome itself. His followers are willing to endure all kinds of hardships. They're willing to submit themselves to torture and death out of allegiance to this man Jesus, who they say himself experienced death and on the third day came alive again and walked out of his tomb, leaving it empty. That's what they made of the empty tomb. That's how they lived their lives because of that empty tomb. Now, this Easter, what do you say? And how will you live because of it? Some of you have known that answer all your lives. For some of you, the empty tomb very simply means Jesus is risen. You've believed that all your life. You've never doubted it. You don't doubt it this morning. You're never going to doubt it. Good for you. For some of you, doubt may be an issue. Maybe it's crept in over time. Maybe you were born with it. Maybe it's shown up because of things not quite working out the way you had planned. Maybe it's because of illness or loss or disappointment or failure that this whole story about Jesus seems an idle tale. I get that. I do. And then there are some of you here this morning who might not have an opinion either way. Maybe you're here under duress because somebody who loves you thought going to church on Easter would be good for you. Hang in there. No matter what you believe or have believed or want to believe or have decided never to believe, wonder with me just for a moment. Despite all the confusion, despite all the disbelief and sketchy evidence for the first Easter, what was it that changed all those people's lives? What was it that took a movement that should never have gotten started to being unstoppable? What happened when those first witnesses looked into that empty tomb? Again, we all have to make that decision for ourselves. What do you see when you look into the empty tomb? What do you think happened there? Some people peek in and just see a lot of nothing. And while I understand that, if you're one of those people, I encourage you to look again. Because if you can believe that empty tomb means Jesus is truly alive, if you're willing to believe that all the people who gave their lives because of that empty tomb didn't sacrifice themselves for something they knew to be or should have known to be a farce, if you can get that far, then I think that empty space can hold for you a lot more than just emptiness. In one way or another, I am sure that everyone here today that has a few years of living on them, that is, brought with us something we wish we didn't have to bring. And I'm not talking about neckties and uncomfortable shoes. I'm talking about things like pain from our past. I'm talking about things like disappointment in others and maybe in ourselves. I'm talking about feelings of inadequacy or helplessness or hopelessness or worry or fear. I'm one of them. How about regrets? How about mistakes? How about the tight binding scars of sins we committed long ago and the fresh wounds of recent ones, either done by us or done to us? Maybe we're carrying some of that as well. What about all the junk and gunk that builds up in everyday life? What do you do with all that stuff? Well, the empty tomb invites you to believe that you can put all of that ugly stuff that you don't want in your life anymore into the grave that Jesus doesn't need anymore. It's dead space, I think, for the dead stuff that makes our lives less than we want them to be. That's why God emptied Jesus' tomb so long ago. And that's why it's still empty. So you always have a place to put all the junk and gunk of life, all the accretions that are formed out of pain and things not working out right, and things you wish you had done, and maybe things done to you. Believing that Jesus faced up to the worst that life can throw at him and beat it for us. Getting rid of your worst and getting God's best in return. Not a bad deal. A deal, I believe, that will change your life. It will change your life just like the lives of those first witnesses to the empty tomb who would not be quiet about what they'd seen or what they didn't see. Who would not give in to the powers that tried to silence them, whose witness had a hand, I believe, in bringing you here to this moment to celebrate the resurrection on this Easter day. You see, here's the thing. The best evidence for the resurrection is found in those who believe it's true. I'm talking about you, if you believe it's true. Easter is not about the evidence we have, because we'll never have enough. Easter is about the evidence we are. It's about each of us looking into that empty tomb and believing that something big happened there, that something for us happened there, that something life-changing happened there, and then living out that hope with one another. So, I encourage you to spend a little time at the empty tomb today. See it for what it is, a place where there's always enough room to store away what's broken and bruised in your life, and then walk away with the gifts of God, of mercy and forgiveness and second chances, believing that you have a share in the new life Jesus was raised to. Believe that Jesus' empty tomb isn't just where his new life began, but where yours began as well and can begin again as often as you need it to.